Great to see everyone. Welcome. My name is Louise Mors. I am the Division Chair of STR, and it's my great pleasure to welcome you to this virtual event on how to empower real-world change through strategy teaching. This year at STR, we're running several events under the theme of impact and relevance. That's why we have this nice background here. So please keep an eye on the STR homepage or social media for advertisements of the next events. I'm sure that we're going to have a very interesting conversation today, and thank you very much to the panelists for being here and participating, and to everyone else for being here. And especially thanks to Florence for organizing this session. I'm going to now hand over to Florence to introduce the event a bit more, and also the speakers that we're going to hear from today.
Thank you, Louise. So good morning or good afternoon, everyone. So this past semester, we organized a few events regarding the impact of our research on the real world. But today we would like to discuss the impact that we can have through our teaching. So typically when we teach, we get faster feedback from the students, we can gauge their understanding, but it's not always clear how much they're going to carry that wisdom into the real world. So today we assemble a panel of 4 experts who are going to share their experience tackling important questions such as why does strategic management or related classes matter in our current environment? What are the critical insights we want to convey to students, and how should we do it so that we can improve the way they design their strategy or create strategies. So I'm going to briefly introduce each panelist in the order in which they're going to talk. They each have 10 minutes to share their insights, and then we'll have 20 minutes for group discussions or Q&A. So I'm delighted to welcome Professor Keyvan Vakili from the London Business School, Professor Jung Kim from the Guinness College of Business, Professor Ilaria Orlandi from Copenhagen Business School, and then Professor Russ from the Wisconsin School of Business. So with all that, Keyvan, I'm going to stop sharing my slide, and then the floor is yours.
All right. Hi, everyone. It's a pleasure to be here. Thanks, Louise and Florence, for organizing this, and thanks for inviting me. I think each of us have about 10 minutes. I'm not sure if I'm going to use all the 10 minutes. Hopefully, I'm going to leave more to others who have more to say about the topic. The topic that that we were asked to talk about is how we can have real-world impact through our teaching, and this is one of the more easier ones because there is actually some research out there that shows that our teaching actually has an impact. I'm still looking for a piece of research that shows our research actually has an impact out there beyond academia. And we'll see if something comes out of it. But we know at least on some topics like corporate strategy, on average, students seem to take away some stuff, good or bad, and do it, sort of use those insights outside. I think I'm gonna tell you a little bit about sort of what I think I do in my class. I only have one observation, which is myself, and I've only been at one institution for 11 years. So that's as anecdotal as it's gonna get. But I'm gonna get to this question of how I think I'm making some impact, and then hopefully you can collect all 4 of us insights and say something. When I joined LBS in 2013, I was assigned to teach core strategy, the bread and butter strategy course, and I was a terrible teacher, at least for 2 years. The ratings suggest so. Here at LBS, and LBS is one of those institutions that we care maybe too much about our teaching and ratings and stuff, and that kind of made me very conscious about my teaching and how I'm what I'm doing in the class, and what I'm teaching in the class. And I over time I sort of became better, especially we redesigned the course after a couple of years, and I really saw this sort of emerge. I saw my role as I take these frameworks that are tested over time. They're now, most of them are decades old, Michael Porter's 5 forces, competitive positioning, corporate strategy frameworks, and all of that. And then what I do is I I basically teach the students two things, or well, three things. One is, what these frameworks are and why you should use them, and then how you should use them. And sort of the emphasis on these things kind of changed over time. So what these frameworks are was what I did at the beginning a lot. Gradually, I realized that I really need to tell students why we even use frameworks. And I think that probably sort of became a lot more important over time. And then how to use them properly gained even more sort of coverage over time, because I realized that a lot, students seem to kind of use these frameworks, but in a very superficial manner a lot of times. And kind of as is one of my biggest worries all the time, is I'm not sure if teaching people to know something a little bit is a good thing or a bad thing. I'm pretty sure it has impact out there. So to the answer to, does it have real world impact? The answer is yes. It's good or bad, I never know. And I still today worry, if I teach someone a little bit about something, am I doing a good thing to them or a bad thing to them? And I lean towards, this is good to know something than nothing, with a lot of caution, or researcher side of the things always do. So I think that was my early days. And kind of, as I kind of started thinking about, well, how can I have more positive impact outside in the world within that context? I basically took those frameworks and tried to apply them to sort of bring cases to the class that I thought were more thoughtful or sort of more impactful. So sustainability cases, or sort of things that generally we all assume that doing more of those or preventing those things are good things. And these are very complex problems, and how we can sort of use our simple frameworks to approach them in a more structured fashion. So sort of an example I usually give a lot of my students is kind of a lot of my, or we get a lot of people coming from consulting. So we have a lot of people who already think they know all of these frameworks, which is always a challenge. And I usually they come with this mindset that, most of these frameworks are there to help firms make more money and make more profit. And kind of one of the things that I do kind of early on is that I remind them that these are only tools to kind of help you organize your thoughts. There is generally for most of these frameworks, there's no objective assigned to them, and you can use them for good or for bad. And kind of one of the examples I give them, I stole it from Anita McGon, so all the credit goes to her, is I usually give them the example of human trafficking. Horrible thing. We want to have nothing of it, as little as possible in the world. And Anita used to tell her students, and I stole it from her sitting in her class, that we need to do all the policing and policy work to kind of prevent this thing as much as possible. But if you think about human trafficking, it's a business. People do it because they make money. And so you can use the same tools to, instead of sort of helping firms make more money, you can use the same tools to kind of figure out, how you can destroy profits in this, really bad industry, and what are the sources of profitability, in this industry, and different sort of actors in this industry. And then kind of I added a little bit more material, so we have some discussions about it, and kind of show them the same frameworks can be used in a way that is a little bit less traditional, and sort of, in my mind, a little bit more impactful. I still do that, and I still think that's what a lot of us do in the class, teaching sort of bread and butter strategy frameworks. And kind of the way I think we can, at least one way we can have more positive impact, is sort of using more, using cases that are sort of, that thinking about them can then have some positive impact out there. I also sometimes use preaching. I just tell them, try to be good people and be more humble. And now that I feel a little bit more confident about my teaching, I can do that. I don't know if it has any effect, but it makes me feel better. So that's one thing. Over time, things changed quite a bit. So about 7 years ago, I was tasked to design a new course. I was even given the title, Digital Strategy. It was because our alumni told us that you don't teach digital stuff to your students enough. So nobody came from technology background in our department. I used to work in technology, and people came to me and said, hey, you designed this course. And I said, sure. I was an assistant professor, so I couldn't really say no. And then, more recently, I designed another course on AI and generative AI. This one, I took it upon myself And it seems like I didn't really learn from the first experience. But then I know that I only have 3 minutes. I saw kind of my situation change quite a bit. I basically moved from taking frameworks that other people have designed, trying to find a good context to apply those frameworks. I changed to taking context where we don't have good frameworks to think about, and then really trying to develop frameworks. And I found it a lot more rewarding. And hopefully, my students also find it, rewarding. And I feel like I'm actually a lot more prepared and more sort of, knowledgeable about how to do that. This is where our research shines, that kind of taking a complex problem and trying to organize it and sort of smooth it out and give it a little bit more structure. And that's what I've been doing for the past few years, basically taking, a complex topic, how do you solve the chicken and egg problem on multi-site platforms? And there are a lot of opinions out there. There's a lot of mess. There's a lot of heuristics. There's some research. And then really kind of sitting in my office, talking to a lot of people, thinking and, and bringing it down, boiling it down to a framework that can be helpful. Gen AI, super hot topic, very messy, a lot of hype. What is the relationship between Gen AI and a strategy? Again, sort of I see my job as taking a very messy topic and kind of boil it down to a couple of simple frameworks that our students can use. And I feel like this generally comes with more sort of positive response from the students, maybe for wrong reasons, but I feel like they can connect these frameworks and these topics a lot more to what happens in their jobs and what happens to them in their daily professional life. So a lot of them going to deal with Gen AI, a lot of them going to deal with AI, a lot of them going to work at platform-based companies. So I feel like I'm actually sort of connecting to them a lot better. For a lot of these courses, I basically have 0 cases. I don't even use cases. I basically have news snapshots from companies that kind of do everything everyone knows, like Uber and Airbnb and Spotify. I show them a snapshot of a piece of news that came out yesterday and we discuss it in the class. So I feel like, I'm not sure if I'm making more impact, but at least I feel like my role has changed quite a lot from taking someone else's framework and applying it to a context to taking a messy context and sort of helping students form some ways of thinking around it. And that actually has also helped my research. So even if it doesn't have real world impact for my students, it seems to have real world impact for me, because then I can kind of use some of those insights and discussions in the class finally to use in my research. So I don't know how much it kind of speaks to the title and topic, and I'm pretty sure others have more thoughtful responses, but I'm going to stop here and kind of let others go ahead with it.
Well, thank you, Keyvan. Yeah, that was great. I think it's going to generate some questions in a little bit. Mingjun, do you want to share the slides?
Yeah, sure. Okay. So do you guys see the slides?
Yes.
Okay. All right. Hello, everyone. My name is Minjung Kim. I'm an assistant professor at the University of Illinois. To give you a little bit of my background, I have been teaching strategy capstone course for undergrad, and it has been only 4 years since I started teaching at the University of Illinois. So compared to Russ and Keyvan, I'm far less experienced, and I'm still in the process of learning as an instructor. So some of you guys might think my thoughts are too naive, but considering that having different views and experiences per se could be helpful, I think and I hope sharing what I learned so far could be helpful. So given the purpose of the symposium today, here I'd like to discuss 2 things. Why is strategy teaching critical for our students' career and firms, and especially in our current environment? And given that, what are the required skill sets we need to teach? And how are we the most effective in conveying a strategy framework or insights? So somewhat overlapped what Keyvan mentioned earlier, but Keyvan mentioned and discussed in a really nicer way. But my one is somewhat naive, but I'd like to share my own experience and thoughts. So for the first question, exercising critical analytical thinking is essential for companies to overcome challenges and attain their objectives. And in this regard, we aim to help students develop fundamental building blocks and improve their capabilities to apply learned concepts to real-world problems. And we always emphasize application. Then what does it mean? Specifically, what do the capabilities to apply learned concepts mean? So it can be considered to have two components. The first one is being able to apply correctly a given concept or the tools or framework correctly to real-world problem. And the second component is being able to identify and select concepts that are relevant to the given problem and integrate the insights they obtained from different analysis from different tools to resolve the problem. And in our class, we often focus more on the first component, and which is correct understanding of the tools. Of course, it is important, but the second thing is very important as well. Then why is it really important? The very first reason is that real-world scenarios involve uncertainty, which requires flexible strategic responses. And the uncertainty level has become higher and higher. So generally, there are two main sources. So things are changing rapidly, more so than ever before. For example, industry boundaries have become blurred. And in addition, unexpected adverse events are rising increasingly. So for example, COVID-19, geopolitical tensions, or climate changes. So given that, if we think about the AFI framework by Frank Rothemel, which is describing the 3 strategic management tasks, analyzing challenges and formulating strategies and implementing the formulated strategies, considering the changes from the uncertainty, how we view certain problems may change, so resulting in changes in our analysis, and also the previously effective solution for a similar problem may turn out to be ineffective, which means resulting in changes in formulation and implementation. And also, strategic decision-making goes through continuous evolution. It is not a one-time problem-solving event, but an ongoing process of establishment, refinement, adjustment, and re-establishment, etc. And multiple challenges may arise sequentially or simultaneously, which require continuous strategic evaluation. And also, in our real-world business operations, managers or decision makers at diverse levels do not always apply the complete tools or frameworks they learned in class. So certain components of framework may hold greater relevance than others. So for example, very useful tools in our corporate strategy and also resource-based view, build, borrow, buy framework or view analysis. So rather than asking all these series of questions, they may consider particular questions more, given the context or the circumstances they face. So rather than recalling a certain framework and going through all the subcomponent questions or dimensions, they instantly think about the relevant question or dimension. So given that, students need to be able to play with diverse concepts, tools, frameworks creatively. So they need to be able to identify or select relevant concepts, tools, or frameworks to a given problem. And at the same time, identify and select the relevant subcomponents and subparts of a given tool and make adaptation if it is required and integrate the insights in diverse ways or the creative ways. So these are the fundamental the skill sets that we need to help students equipped with. So in order to play with them, students must fully understand why the frameworks are important and they need to practice how it can be used. So here I'd like to share my own experience. So in students' case analysis, usually like a 5 versus analysis, students tended to be paying relatively little attention to the purpose of the 5 versus analysis. And they were doing 5 versus analysis because it was required by instructors. And they didn't make their conclusion about the attractiveness or profitability of the industry, which is the purpose of the 5 versus. So I emphasized its major purpose. And after then, I observed their use of their five verses analysis was very limited. So for example, they used the five verses like insights or the takeaways in decision making regarding which industry a focal company should enter, or whether a focal company should exit out of the current industry or not. So after then, I always try to discuss other applications. So for example, the five versus analysis, it helps understand the potential boundary of what it can do. So in the Harvard business cases, AMC case and also Lego case, after doing the case analysis, I was emphasizing that like both industries experience a similar issue, which is the decline in the market demand. But movie theaters like AMC are relatively limited what they can do in terms of the profitability source. It is mainly due to a strong bargaining power of movie distributors like Disney or 20th the first century. And AMC or the movie theaters, they cannot make money from selling tickets per se. But Lego is different. They are more relaxed. Of course, this type of the analysis or the key takeaways can be obtained by reading financial tables, but because they show the income sources, but they do not understand or know why ticket selling profitability is low by just the reading the financial tables only. And another example is SWOT analysis. Usually students know this like a SWOT analysis so very well, not only business school classes, but other college and other levels of the classes. They very much handle this SWOT analysis. So majority of the students know how to do it, but they do not know how to use it. So for example, combining strength and opportunities, how can the company use internal strengths to take advantage of external opportunities? This is really important because this is the first step to think more about the direction of the solution for a given challenge. So this could be another example that demonstrates my effort to like help our students understand or to practice how they can apply the actual tools in their actual problem solving. So here is my conclusion. Effective strategy education goes beyond just theoretical concepts to practical application. And in terms of application, being able to identify and select relevant tools or relevant the frameworks and integrate the insights in a diverse or in a very creative way is very important considering our the current environment. And for this, instructors should help students comprehend why these frameworks are important and practice how these frameworks could be used. So yeah, that is my presentation.
Thank you so much, Mingjun. Started typing some questions in the chat. But let's go to Ilaria, yeah, and then we'll have plenty of time then for Russ and then to revisit all the questions. Ilaria, do you have a slide you want to share or no slide?
I don't have slides. Thank you, Florence and Louise, for having us here and for all of you joining us, and for my fellow panelists for your insights. So my interpretation of at least today's task and the focus of this virtual symposium has been on what can we do as educators to help out the future generation of leaders and managers when they enter the workforce and potentially already from the bottom and then going over the years a bit more up. And then I started reflecting upon how I approach even designing moment of the course. I've had the fortune of designing some courses from scratch since I've become an assistant professor and partially already during my PhD studies. And I've found out that I put a lot of thinking in my design, and hopefully this reflections upon that can help you reflect upon your own teaching, but also help us our conversation move forward. So I actually realized that I have a lot of points that can also very well they're very well intertwined without us coordinating with my previous two speakers. So what I realized that I do is to think about the process of designing a course by looking at what I want to do with the course, regardless of the topic. The topic will come later. Then how I actually try to implement what I want to achieve. And then I look at the why and discuss the why with the students quite openly and quite directly. So the what that motivates me and helps me design a course is usually which skills do I want to give the student? So which skills do I want to help the student train, or even potentially in some ways help them develop for the first time? And this is a part or a task that I find quite challenging and exciting, because I happen to teach both at the bachelor level and especially Bachelor 1, so our very first year students, but also at the master level. And there, of course, I realize that the skills and the depth of what can be expected from the students, I see that, of course, can vary a lot given their previous expertise and experience over time. So what I start with is to think, okay, which skills would I want the students to cover throughout the course and potentially to train if they've already potentially gotten the chance to develop the skills before they reached me and within the course. So this is how I start then my pedagogical process and planning for the different subjects that I teach. So having in mind one example of a skills that it's very dear to me, and I know that Young, you also referred to it, is critical thinking. So giving students the capability to understand what they're doing with how they use the frameworks, how they're applying it, why they're applying them, is really, I see it as a key skill for them to develop over time. So having this at the center of then my planning, just to give an example of one of the skills, then I think about which tools could I use in class throughout the different even type of class that we can have. Is it more of a content class? Is it an exercise class that we can have as an experience for the students to truly get accustomed to the different tools that they might be using, but also how to apply the tools. So I usually start off with some theory. I would let them read papers or chapters of the articles, chapters of the book or papers from different articles that are associated to the class. And then we reflect upon some of the theories that might be emerging via those articles or via that chapter. And then try to implement it with concrete examples that the students themselves might have experienced. Depending on the subject, if it's a matter of, for instance, making a decisions within a group, and we're talking about the top management team, it's very unlikely they've already been part of a top management team themselves, but then I ask them to reflect upon some of their group work experience with other students to give them a bit of a sense, not only about the decisions and that could be involved of what the team has to decide upon, but really to focus on the dynamics, because that is a way that I use to connect with them because they've already more experience with them. And then I try to use, similarly to what discussed with Keyvan, cases to help them out and truly understand how complex the reward is. And for this, I start in the beginning with very short cases, but then I purposely give them longer and longer cases, even with potentially pages of information that they might not need to answer any questions that are associated to the task or the exercise for that class. And I do this personally, and I will also tell them, because as a manager in the future or as an employee, you might not just be given the information that you need to solve your task. And therefore, part of the exercise is to understand which pieces of information is key and how can that be applied, having in mind the different theories. So implicitly, they're also finding the information and connecting that information to the tools, as Min Young was just mentioning. I also love to use debates in class, and this I saw that it's a bit dependent on the culture in the country in which we're in, but also the way in which students are evaluated. So what is allowed at the different institutions to give students grades to. But I try, so at CBS, we cannot grade students in what they do within the classroom. So debates, I could not give students a grade based on how they debate in class, but I still try to use it as an exercise to direct them in the sense of giving them a viewpoint on a controversial statement in which I know that they will find articles, research, and support in all directions. So agreeing with the statement, disagreeing with the statement, or potentially even being in between, so seeing both sides. And then let them search and have their moment of finding the information and deciding how this links to the course material, and then present it to the group so that they can be exposed to the fact that information, but also a given decision might not be as black and white as one might think. And especially there is not necessarily in our field, especially of strategy, one correct decision or one correct solution. As my students at time ask me, what is the one solution to this case? There are several possible solutions that managers could be taking. And this is where I really emphasize the how. So the fact that there is not really one solution that could be emerging, there are lots of solutions that could be emerging. And then what we train in terms of skills is to apply the material for them to explain how you go from the case material and information in there, the theory that we covered together in class, in understanding how we can really take it to a solution that is sound, at least in the rationale, even though it might be very different than what others might be thinking, because that could also be a starting point, especially with the case of the debates, of how then different viewpoints might be generated. Because each group takes, important information that has been checked, and then still reaches different conclusions, because of course I give them the viewpoint, but that is also part of the exercise. So this is then how I use the different frameworks and the different theories to make them develop the skills by training with giving their presentation in the debates, but also writing actual text on the answers to the questions related to the case. And why I do this, I tell them quite explicitly. So I give them the rationale. You will have some course material that we will cover together. You might not remember it in a few years from now, all the definitions that we cover, and so on and so forth. But what is really important to understand is for you to develop those skills, because those is what you will bring with you to the workplace, to your next steps, and potentially to address challenges that we don't know yet that will appear in the future. So this is where I then try to use the cases, the examples, and the frameworks to something that might interest them, to sort of leverage their motivation and make them interested in understanding that are there not just to learn about the course, about the frameworks, but also to develop themselves and help their own growth over time. And I see that in terms of impact, concreteness, I see the students' text when they hand in their assignment improving over the different weeks on how they apply the material, which is quite rewarding. I also see them mentioning how they use or how they can relate the topics that we cover in class to their work experience they already have, or a few years down the road also. They come back to me. That doesn't happen too often, but they say, to those that I'm still in touch with, I've been approaching several problems in the workplace coming from my interest in this specific topic that emerged from your class. Or I know now that when I'm going to enter the workplace, there's going to be decisions that there are not that black and white to make decision upon, which I find then that the what has been understood and processed. So it's quite rewarding with the impact that we can make with our teaching. So this was what I do in a nutshell. I hope that is helpful, and I look forward to the discussion. Thank you.
Thank you, Ilaria. So Russ, I believe it's your turn.
I believe it is.
You want to try to share slides?
I will do that. Okay. Let's do this. So thank you for inviting me. I hope I have something useful to say. The 3 previous presentations covered a lot of ground, and what I'll talk about will correlate with some of the things that you've heard. I think Jung talked and Keyvan talked a bit more about sort of how to apply frameworks in a sort of more relevant way to current world problems, which is important. Ilaria talked a bit more about how to design the course, how to use class time, how to make it strike home for the students. I'll probably be a little bit more in Ilaria's camp in terms of focusing on sort of nuts and bolts things that you can do in class. Some of you may know that I maintain lately not very well the Carpenter Strategy Toolbox for teaching strategy, and I tend to focus a bit on experiential exercises that people can use in class. So I'll draw a little bit on that. I guess what I want to be my central theme for what I'm going to talk about today is how to consider uncertainty and change as central themes throughout the course. So this is a standard sort of diagram of content that most of us tend to cover. And I want to start in Min Jung and Keyvan's, I guess I'll say, court, focused a bit on how do we apply frameworks in a relevant way. And one of the issues that I see constantly is that they apply 5 forces or internal analysis in a static kind of way. And the very first should be obvious, but it isn't always obvious. How is the industry changing over time? How is it? We always talk about it being dynamic, and then they give you a 5 forces analysis of the industry that's not saying what's the direction of the industry. Similarly, for internal analysis, I want to emphasize, first of all, we shouldn't probably be asking whether a firm has a competitive advantage, a sustained competitive advantage, because that's pretty rare. But what we should be asking is, does the firm have valuable resources that might give it a temporary advantage? And if so, what's changing in the world, and how long will that temporary advantage be relevant, and what can they do next? So that's what I'll say about the frameworks, but I want to give you a sense that I feel like we need to apply the frameworks in a way that is as dynamic as the world that we're trying to explain. Most of the time I will today focus on the implementation end of it, because a lot of uncertainty and change come from the implementation side. And I actually think that people, at least in the US side of things, they spend more time focused on formulating strategy and a bit less on implementing strategy. And so I tend to focus a little bit more evenly on them, and I want to give you a sense. So the first thing I want to do is give you a sense that we have to be thinking about the world as a multiverse. Students these days can understand that, even if they're not like Spider-Man fans. And that means thinking about different states of the world that could emerge as a tool for understanding the uncertainty that arises. So I'll talk about a few things that just deal with uncertainty. How do you bring the true notion of uncertainty into your classroom? And I'll talk about a few example exercises. So I think scenario planning is a simple and powerful tool. And so I talk about, how do we identify sources of uncertainty? How do the sources of uncertainty interact to create different scenarios where the uncertainty plays out in different ways? So we're not just looking at one at a time, but maybe we're looking at a few things at a time. And then what I've found over time is that the implementation side of scenario planning is actually the hard part. It's not hard to generate multiple scenarios of how the world could unfold. What's hard is when you're implementing a strategy to identify trigger points, early signs that a given scenario is emerging, and alter your implementation plan to reflect that a different state of the world is emerging. That turns out to be the hard part. I didn't anticipate this in my early years of teaching, but now I think that's really the problem. Once you start implementing, you have kind of blinders on, and it's hard to think about the world as being different in some fashion. So one exercise that I do is the Tinker Toy and/or Builderific. I happen to use a now defunct toy called Builderific. The task is build the tallest freestanding tower with one set in 3 minutes. and you have 10 minutes to organize your firm and plan. And I tell them point blank, I used to think I shouldn't do this, but I say point blank, develop at least 2 scenarios for how the world might unfold differently in your implementation than in your planning. And during the planning, they're not allowed to assemble any pieces. So there is a lot of uncertainty about how the pieces will actually assemble. And I find that about at least half of the towers will fall at the last minute. So they haven't anticipated how these materials will come together. And we have a rich discussion of, well, why didn't you anticipate these things? And at what point in your implementation did you think things might not be going right? And what they tend to do is they follow the strategy, they follow their initial plan all the way to the end, and until the tower falls, and they're not monitoring to see how their initial assumptions might be incorrect. I also want to talk a little bit about quantitative analysis. Students who come out of our finance classes think that the object is to come up with the right answer, and you've heard from my colleagues before me that it isn't about the right answer. This is management, so it's always about it depends, and what does it depend on? Well, I like to use quantitative cases where I can. I admit that this is Beam Suntory, so it's about alcohol, so it's not about sustainability, and in that sense, we're not changing the world in a positive way, except that for some of us, maybe alcohol helps us get through. But what I want to point out about this is it's an M&A, and there's a lot of uncertainty about the value that will be created from an acquisition. And I focus the analysis on what is the likelihood that cost synergies will emerge, and what is the likelihood that revenue synergies will emerge. In other words, a lot of the uncertainty about whether value will be created is the ability to implement and the timing of implementation. So we know that the timing of cash flows affects the value, the net present value. And this allows them to, with a little less hand waving, get a sense of how important these implementation assumptions really are. And it might sound like a lot to develop separate NPV models for each end of the decision tree. But once you have one model, changing the assumptions for the one model is actually pretty straightforward. So if you're going to do fun, interactive things in class, I think it's also good to do to introduce uncertainty in the quantitative side of the class as well. And frankly, you need to get the attention of the finance geeks who think that life is inside of a spreadsheet anyway. Another example of an exercise I use to deal with uncertainty is this is Gourmet Adventures exercise is a standard winner's curse kind of exercise. Guess the value of the jar of coins. I give them 3 rows of coins, so nickels, pennies, and quarters. I say these are allegories for 3 restaurant chains that the target firm owns, and this is an acquisition. You're bidding on it, and it introduces that in the context of the winner's curse, where you have a strong risk of overbidding, that strategic uncertainty that we talk about in our classes is paramount to understanding the risk of the winner's curse. So a multi-business firm increases your risk. Foreign exchange rates increase your risk of the winner's curse. Any kind of synergy. So this is there's no synergy in valuing this jar. It's worth the same to all of the potential bidders. I have never had a situation where the winning bid was not an overbid. And so we have a rich discussion of, well, how do you deal with that uncertainty and actually make money in acquisitions? Another exercise I like to do that focuses on managing strategic change is this exercise called short change, where students come in, they buy a numbered game card for $1. And some of the game cards tell them that they're managers. About 1/3 of them are managers. And as soon as they have that, I send the managers out into the hall, and I tell the managers that the instructor will increase the profit of the organization by 50% if the employees sit in the order of their employee number within 40 minutes. Meanwhile, the employees are told that they will absolutely get their dollar back if they remain in their seats for the whole exercise. We don't say there might be an opportunity to get more than $1, but of course that is out there. And what happens is that inevitably, the managers fail to gain the trust of the employees. The employees have questions about what are the gains, and why is it you want us to move, and what do we get if we move? The exercise turns to the fairness in distributing the gains. And an inevitable last point is that there is the last person who has not moved to their seat. And suddenly they have the ability to hold up the rest of the class for additional funds. And that illustrates differential bargaining power of, stars, key individuals. I have never had a class actually sit. Well, that's not totally true. I once had a class sit in the prescribed order, but in order to do so, the managers gave away all of their gains, like they had less than $1 at the end of the exercise because they gave away more of their gains than what the instructor, was adding in. So it led to a nice discussion about, well, how do you do this and distribute the gains? You can see how relevant that might be. And of course, it relates to my own research, so I have a stake in that. So I leave you with this notion that uncertainty is critical as we teach strategy in today's world. Understanding how things change is critical in this world that we operate in, and that we need to focus on uncertainty and change both in the formulation side of strategy and on the implementation side of strategy. And with that, I will turn it back.
Thank you so much, Russ. Wait, Keyvan, I know you have to leave soon. Do you want any observations or remarks you might have, or questions you want to tackle from the chat before you go?
Thanks so much. I don't want to, I think there are quite a few questions. I don't want to take anyone's time. I will jump in. I can stay for another 4 or 5 minutes, and then I'm going to run faster a little bit. So I think it's fair to open it to everyone to see the questions and answer.
Thank you. Okay, so questions. So wait, Jeffrey, you had a few questions. You want to unmute yourself and talk a little bit about AI in the classroom? And what was your questions, or how you're using it right now?
Well, I'm looking for ideas about how to use it more effectively. Things are changing so incredibly fast, as well as the capability. And so I've been leaning into it in real time. I require students to use it, but I also require students to acknowledge it, provide examples of prompts and output in appendices, and to make a comment on how they validated results and what they found it useful for and less useful for. So that's kind of a standard pattern in using and requiring students to use it. And for myself, I've been finding it useful to help construct assignments. So one practical example is a semester project. I got a draft, I started fiddling with the draft, and then I asked it, how long would it take a student team to do it? And it came out with 30 hours. And I said, can you revise this so it would take 20 for a team to do it? And it did a pretty good job, and it put how many minutes it thought each section would take. And so it helped me pin down, it made that process more efficient for me. But this is pretty rudimentary. I have thought about using it to take a bunch of current material from the media, like print articles and stuff, and I haven't tried this yet, and see if it can write a short case on something and give it a couple of topics to make sure it incorporates, like 5 forces or strategy diamond. So I'm just in learning mode, trying to figure it out.
I can say one thing. Well, 2 things quickly. Jeff, I haven't used it a lot. So I use it a lot. I also teach it, but I haven't used it a lot in that sense that you said, sort of developing cases. One thing I did this time for this year for the first time, I gave them the ChatGPT answers to the questions I gave them. And I told them, evaluate those answers. Because inevitably they're going to do that. They're going to have, a bunch of them become consultants. They have to do some analysis. They're going to do it using ChatGPT, and kind of they go back and forth and try to fine tune it. So I gave them the answers and I said, I fine tune it as much as you could possibly do, evaluate it. And kind of one thing they don't realize, and then kind of we discuss it a little bit, is a lot of times it's very convincing, but it's either wrong or very superficial, even though it's wrapped in a very, very convincing language a lot of times, what they get out of these LLMs. So we talk about it, and I kind of take an opportunity to teach them also something about GenAI. I don't know how useful it is, but you can give it a shot maybe. It's a lot of work.
I think that's a fantastic idea, because one of the things I try to emphasize is how to become critical users, which is what you just described does. I want them to enter the workforce being cautious and wary. Yeah. At best, students will be able to get stuff that helps them compete as average. And I try to emphasize that they're not going to, it's their ability that'll get them in the top 10%. But I think what you just described is a fantastic idea, and I'm going to give it a spin this semester.
I'm more than happy to share what I gave them for one of my assignments if you want an example. I also want to just say one thing before I run about what Russ said, which is, and everyone else also mentioned, I think Russ just re-emphasized it, which is sort of there is analysis and then there is execution or sort of recommendation, whatever we call it. And there is always this massive disconnect. Now they do some analysis and they get to the recommendation part or implementation part. And I think partly it's because we just don't have as much frameworks there. And I really appreciate what Ross did, sort of bringing the sort of the experiential part to the class. I think it's not framework, but it's sort of practice and sort of just practicing again and again. One thing I do in addition to sort of all of those experiential things, I force them to convince their colleagues about a course of action. And they inevitably fail. Like there has not been a single situation where they do some analysis and they come to the front of the class and say, I think, this company should do this. And then everyone else is like, yeah, that made sense. We're going to go all with that. And then I use it usually to sort of, as a tool, that sort of that experience. It's like, why does it not work? You did all of this analysis. Why couldn't you convince others? And I think, I'm not sure how many people do it, but I find it sort of quite illustrating of the gap between sort of analyzing something and then convincing other people that they should do a course of action, they should commit to a course of action. I think that's again, so something to maybe try. I'm gonna shut up and I'm gonna run, by the way. Sorry everyone, I have to leave.
Thank you so much.
Pick up my son. Thank you so much. Bye.
Bye.
I want to toss in, because I was just thinking when Russ was talking, there might be some ways to use maybe some of these tools as part of an assignment to help with the implementation part, to discuss that, because a lot of students do not have work experience if you're in an undergrad setting. And so I don't have the imagination yet, but my intuition tells me that there might be a way that they could use these dialogues to put out something that helps them think more of different steps of implementation, particularly if they don't have work experience, because I've run into that all the time with undergrads. And I've used it to give students experience, like in interviewing people, if they're going to go out and interview people for an assignment, as a way to, create sort of a starting point to start drafting out that guide interview.
Yeah, thank you. No, I think so. I thought sometimes the students, when they ask, maybe more master students, I'm going to have an interview with a consulting firm, and like, how can I practice? I'm like, you could try to actually practice with generative AI and see, ask them questions, see what they answer, and be critical and see how you can improve the answer that generative AI is giving you. But wait, I see, Ben, I see you had the questions. Do you want to ask? I'm not sure. So it was basically, let me see, what have been some of your most successful assignment projects to help inform why to use frameworks? So Min Jung shared already some examples with the AMC Lego comparison. I don't know, Ilaria, if you want to share something else, or anyone is, welcome to also share their thoughts.
I can share one of my favorite exercise for students at the master level to engage in. So I normally ask them to analyze a CEO's decision. So I teach strategic leadership and corporate governance, and I ask them, okay, there is someone that has reached the top of an organization. You can potentially pick one of the big corporations. Think how they ended up with that decision, and then reflect upon the pros and cons. And I find that in the beginning, it seems like an easy task. And then students start realizing the complexity of, okay, how do I understand how they made that decision, or what information they base that on, and which documents can I go and look at to understand the situation better, and which theories do they actually potentially can help understand why those choices were made. So this is a concrete analysis exercise in a sense, but it gives the students the capabilities to analyze a strategic decision of their choice, and then to understand a bit better how those decisions are made, and especially like to make them reflect upon what went well and what could have been done better and why, using theory that can refer to that. So I hope that this can help then as an example of an exercise.
Maybe I can add a little bit to this point. So there are two things. So one is, usually for me, the best spot is after a student presentation, I usually ask previous presentation groups to share any thoughts on their solution, because and also I usually intendedly select one of the previous groups that I think their analysis were prematurely connected to this analysis or things like that. Then they happen to share some of the really similarities, or what they have to do considering what they have done before, things like that. So that is one, like a bridge moment. They can connect different tools, or even like application of the single, like a same tool to different situations. And another one is very practical. So the HBS case, DMAP case is one of my favorites. So as the Russ mentioned earlier, multiple uncertainties, and also which will be creating really complex situations, complex challenges for the company, which is resulting in scenario planning. In a DMAP cases, high levels of uncertainty in many different dimensions. So first one is more the market uncertainty. So DMAP is creating the 3D map for autonomous vehicle, especially for the level 4 and 5 in the industry. But level 4 and 5, as you know, it is not yet there, right? So they even not sure about the market, when the market will be established and when. And also at the same time, another uncertainty is coming from the competitor side. So existing competition situation, given the case, is not really severe, but the potential competitors are their existing buyers, which is automobile companies, because they have all the data, they always collected, and it is easy for them to convert into the 3D mapping the players. So in that sense, the type of uncertainty is also added to the situation. So this is I have regarding Van's question.
Thank you. Oh, I think that's great. I just shared the resources in the chat with everybody else. So I think we're at the hour, and I know everybody is quite busy. It's the end of the semester. So thank you so much to Ilaria, Min Jung, Russ, also Keyvan, who had to leave. Thank you, Louise, for helping organize all those interesting sessions. And we hope to see you. I think it's already Friday. We have another STR event, and we'll have more also in June. So thank you so much, everyone, and see you online.
And thank you, Florence, for hosting us. Thank you very much, everyone. And thank you.